Welcome to another Between Two Curtains podcast episode, produced by Red Noses International. Today, we'll be exploring healthcare clowning as a serious art form, one that brings play, connection, and emotional support into hospitals, care homes, and crisis settings. We'll unpack the misconceptions, the craft behind the red nose, and why something as simple as humour can have such a profound impact. And to explore this topic, I'm joined by Lukáš Houdek, a professional clowning coach and teacher who's worked as a healthcare clown for over 25 years. So Lukáš, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
So clowning is genuinely an art form. How is it that so few people see it that way?
Many people, I think, see clowns as characters or figures that are of the least consequence in theater and therefore also of the least consequence in life. When you look at someone with a red nose on, you have a tendency to go kind of, I don't really have to worry too much about this person. It's just about fun. It's just about the laughs. I think this is somehow connected with the way we perceive comedy as such. It's always been considered the little sister of tragedy. Tragedy is there to teach us about life. Comedy is there to kill time, essentially, when we have nothing better to do, which is a misconception in itself, for sure. But that's not our topic. Also, some of it has to do with the clown figure or the clown character, the modern clown figure being born out of the circus, which is, of course, the circus is it's a place with many people. It's the audience is very strong. On the stage, in the manege, you have to compete for attention with horses and many other animals, and much stuff is happening there, and acrobats being high in the air, which kind of forced clowns to be loud, to be big, big shoes and big pants and, big makeup and big hats. So when you take a clown out of the circus and you put this clown figure in the hospital, for example, as sometimes happens, people think that this is the way to do it. In some organizations, this is the approach. Then you will immediately find out that this figure of the clown with the big red nose, which sometimes you can squeeze and it makes noises, and this big figure, it does not fit in the hospital room because there's not hundreds of people, there's no horses, there's just a little kid in a horizontal position. So you have to take all these trappings away, and you have to have just the essence of the clown or the healthcare clown in this situation, in this condition. And I think this partial insensitivity to how the clown figure is being translated to different environments and how it is being communicated to different audiences, I think this also in part is responsible for clowns not being taken too seriously because they are seen as, insensitive in a way. But you cannot really put a clown from the circus in the healthcare environment. Like I said, you have to transform this figure into a healthcare clown, which is a very different concept altogether. But the basic task remains the same. It's to make people laugh. It's to make people enjoy life.
So on that note, what is the biggest misunderstanding about what a healthcare clown is?
I would say when people think of healthcare clowns or clowns in general, I think they often see the external face of a clown. They see the trappings of the clown. They see, they think of the wig and they think of the loud voice and they think of the makeup and the costume and the big shoes. All these things are pointless in the hospital. There's no competition for the attention of the audience, so we can do without all these things. One of the biggest misunderstandings about healthcare clowning is that they are clowns just in the external appearance, that they are well-meaning people who dress up as clowns, who put on a nose, and that they come to entertain children in a way which is not professional. They are well-meaning amateurs. In our organization and in Red Noses International, there's so much emphasis put on the professionality of the work that, all these external appearances are secondary to the skill, to the art of clowning. that you need to develop within. It's not something that you can see on the surface of a clown or a clown artist.
Yeah, it seems that people have this real stereotype of what a clown is. And as you said, it's this real circus, silly, big hair clown, but a healthcare clown is something very different to that.
Yes, and of course there's an even bigger misconception is connected with the horror, the killer clown figure. That's something that's relatively new, but it has taken on a life of its own. We must constantly keep persuading people that what we do, and we have to do it through what we do, that what we do is completely different, that what we do is not loud, that what we do is not on the surface. We still do make people laugh, and it is our main objective to make people feel good and to make people enjoy life, essentially, no matter what situation you're in. But we are not doing it by appearing as clowns or by connecting to a stereotype.
And when we think about that clown stereotype, I guess silliness is a big part of it. So what is it that healthcare clowns do besides being silly?
Yes, clowns often are described as silly or clumsy. If you ask kids, what do clowns do? Well, they say, well, they have a red nose and they are behaving silly, or they are funny, they're clumsy. Actually, this clumsiness or this silliness is a rather profound way of playing the game of life. And I'll try and explain this sentence. I think professional clowns are very deep-rooted in reality. That's the first thing, because we often think of clowns as someone who lives in a fantasy world. It's like nothing is real. It's all balloons and smiles and bubbles. And a professional clown is very deeply rooted in reality, which is yet another reason why hospital is a good place for a clown to live and for a clown to do what they do. A healthcare clown, I mean. In order to be silly, you need to accept obstacles. You need to see the world as an obstacle. Now, there's a difference between the world actually being an obstacle, like an illness is an obstacle. Being in the hospital is an obstacle. A cast on your leg is an obstacle. But it's quite another thing to put obstacles in front of yourself, which is exactly what clowns do. That's the definition of game, actually. The definition of game is, as put forward by the British philosopher Bernard Suits, it's a voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. So clowns are people who put actively unnecessary obstacles in their way, and they try to overcome these obstacles. In this way, they encounter problems, they behave in a clumsy and silly way, but we have to bear in mind that these are not people who would trip over anything that stands in their way. You first have to design the obstacle for yourself, and the obstacle has to be good enough and creative enough that it enables you to overcome it in a way that makes other people laugh. So that's the beginning of the art. How do you design an obstacle for yourself? It is not an art that people would normally enjoy. We do not design obstacles for ourselves. We try to avoid obstacles as much as we can. But clowns, I always think of them as being in their workshops, creating obstacles, engineering obstacles, putting together mechanisms that they can then trip over in a very creative way. It's different to trip over something and to be able to create that thing that you trip over yourself in a way that other people will laugh.
Yeah, really fascinating. I think a lot of people would never even dare to assume that there's so much that goes into being a healthcare clown. I think maybe they assume that clowns just show up and be silly, but there's a lot of deep thought that goes into it. And when we think about someone who is a clown, a circus clown perhaps, or a clown performer, what would it take to turn somebody like that into a healthcare clown?
Yes, there are many different types of performers. If I were to speak in the technical procedure, it's like first you have to apply, of course.
Mm-hmm.
You have to say, I want to become a healthcare clown, and you have to apply for the position. The first step by the artistic departments, I would say, is non-discriminatory in a way. It's like, you can be a performer, which can be good, but you can also be a person without a performative experience. That still does not disqualify you from becoming a healthcare clown. Of course, being an experienced performer can be helpful because clowning, and healthcare clowning included, is an art form where you have to stand in front of an audience and you have to have the basic technique and you have to know how to relate to an audience. Having said that, it's very different from acting. So, if you have a lot of acting experience, it's not necessarily helpful if you want to become a healthcare clown. So let's imagine we have this person who has come to the audition to become a healthcare clown. And the question that stands in front of us is, like you said, how do we make this person into a healthcare clown? What's the process? What's the procedure? The procedure largely is a mystery, I would say. There's many steps which are very challenging. You have to face a lot of challenges in this training, sometimes with surprising results. I think you have to have a lot of empathy. You have to have a good grasp of who you are, which is one of the most difficult things to do. It's like you have to understand what you're doing. You have to have your body under control. You have to be able to relate to your feelings. You have to be able to connect with your body and with your mind. Listening to myself, and it all sounds almost esoteric, but it's still theater. You just have to be aware of where you stand in the space, what your body is doing, who's looking at you, what is the age of the person looking at you, what are the potential handicaps of the person looking at you, because we are speaking of a healthcare setting. And when you combine all these perspectives together, you have to figure out how to make that person laugh. Now, that's the biggest challenge of all, isn't it? It's like, when someone tells you, make me laugh or make somebody else laugh, it's one of the most difficult tasks that you can get. It's almost impossible. So how do we do this? How do we teach people to do this? And how do people discover this ability within themselves? That's the greatest mystery. There are ways and there are techniques and there are methods and exercises, but it all takes time. And in my opinion, it all comes back to the question of, are we playful enough? Do I have enough energy to get involved in a game with myself, which would be interesting for the audience to watch?
Right.
Does this make any sense? I wonder, because it also sounds probably very cryptical or enigmatic. But when you see a clown, you know immediately, is it a clown or is he or she a clown or not? Do they make me laugh or not? It's quite clear.
It for sure makes sense. I'm also surprised at how extensive the training is and how much healthcare clowns have to go through to become a healthcare clown. Would you say that this element of the training, this teaching the healthcare clowns how to make people laugh, is that the most surprising element of the training it takes to become a healthcare clown, or is there something else that might surprise people?
Since the moment I applied 25 years ago for the position of healthcare clown, I keep being surprised. So I would say it's like a box full of surprises, that never stops amazing you. This sounds like advertising for the profession, but actually it's largely true. So I couldn't really put my finger on what is the most surprising thing that you will go through. But it really was like, for me, it was like, entering this very special world where everything it's not like you're escaping reality. In the clown world, like I said already, it's like you're entering an augmented version of reality. Actually, reality becomes even more real, but you treat it as though it was a game, So it's like you treat it as in a very playful way. And when you approach reality as material for play, for clown play, then, you're in for one surprise after another. I think maybe one of the biggest surprises, to answer a question in a more specific way, for many people is how much work it actually involves. It's like, because people would think like, okay, I'm an actor, I can play my way into clowning. This almost never works. I mean, it probably never works. You cannot really play the role of a clown because clown is not a role. Now, this we would have to unpack in some kind of longer version of this podcast. What does it mean? Clowning is not a role. So is clown me? But if the clown is me, then where's the difference between me and the clown? It becomes very philosophical. But I think many people try and join the project thinking it's going to be rather simple. Clowning is probably not very difficult to do, like, making sick children laugh. That sounds like a very easy job. And I can probably do it without much training. All three are false. You really have to put a lot of work into it.
Yeah, it sounds like that's very much the case. And I assume especially because these healthcare clowns are dealing with a hospital environment, which, is a serious environment. It's an emotional environment, and it's something that does require a lot of training. So why is the artistic quality that we work so hard on at Red Noses, why does that matter so much in a hospital environment or a care home or a crisis setting?
I think the main reason is that all these settings that you just described are professional themselves. It's like you have to be a real professional when you work in healthcare. The healthcare institution has to be run in a very professional way because it deals with very, very serious things. So do care homes, emergency, settings. That's the same thing. You need people who are professional. You need people who are well oriented in what they are doing. You need people who are very focused on the audience that they serve. All these things combined together, this is what healthcare clowns should be too. If you want to be a strong and reliable partner for these institutions, you have to be strong in these fields, and then you will be respected and accepted. Like we said in the beginning, it's not always easy. Clowns are not, when you put on a red nose, you're not the best advocate of being taken seriously by definition, which is like yet another reason why the project that supports you, why the organization that sends you into these institutions must be super professional. For these artists to be able to do their, silly, clumsy, to do their work, essentially, they need to be supported by an organization which is able to advocate its service, which is able to explain why we do the things the way we do them and why we think they fit perfectly in environments where they would maybe not be seen as the most natural.
Perfect. And connected onto that, when we think about the staff of the people who work in these facilities, I think people would often, think, okay, of course it's impacting the patients who are there, the people who live in these facilities. But I think people occasionally could forget about the staff who carry a lot every day working in these difficult environments. How does the healthcare clown's presence affect those people?
Clowns do not make differences between their audiences, which is why healthcare clowns do not either. So when healthcare clowns come to any of these institutions, everybody they meet is essentially their audience. They do not just play for the kids, overlooking the adults. So for the clown artist, or rather for the clown figure, for the clown character, everybody is the same. Everybody is a member of the audience. Of course, the clown artists, they differentiate between the people, and they know where to focus their attention in a certain situation. These people, the staff, the people who take care of the people in the institutions or in the healthcare settings, like you said, they are quite often overlooked. Not only that, but it's very touching when they come to the clowns and they say, how do you do it? How is it possible that, that you can take it like so much psychological burden on yourself? You see so many difficult things, and yet you manage to make the people, to make the children, to make the audience laugh. And that I find this touching because like the only logical answer to that would be, do I hear correctly? Are you telling me this? Like you who spend the whole day, the whole shift in this situation are telling me, who come just for a few hours into the institution. And my job is solely basically to make people feel good and to make them laugh. And you're telling me, how can I bear so much pressure, and how can I take on such psychological burden? It is them who actually have the biggest burden. It is obvious, which is also why the healthcare clowns are there very much for them. And they try to make them laugh as much as they do any other audience in these settings, and they deserve it.
Yeah, much. For sure. And it's beautiful what you said about the clown being a kind of equalizer in these environments. Everybody to them is the same and everyone can be involved, and it's like a presence that connects with everybody. So when we think about children in these kinds of environments, how is it that children appreciate this kind of art that the clowns are doing in these settings so deeply? They connect with it really well. And how is that the case?
I actually think you answered the question yourself, just, like 30 seconds ago, because what you said about clowns is basically we could also say about children. Children are also these great equalizers. They relate to everybody in very much same way. They are interested, curious about everyone. They are curious about the whole world. They do not have an agenda. They do not set themselves goals and objectives. And they do not treat reality as a means to satisfy these objectives. They treat reality as something to be discovered, as something very, very intriguing and potentially dangerous. But it's something that, you keep going towards rather than stepping back. That's how kids learn to walk, isn't it? Like you fall 1,000 times and you do not give up, even though it hurts sometimes, but you still keep pushing. And I think this is something that children have in common with clowns. And I think this is what the kids relate to in clowns immediately. They understand because the clowns relate to the world and to reality in very much the same way as the children do. And this is something on an instinctive level, I think. It's like clowns are not theater, so you do not have to explain to children the concept of theater. Some very small children might not even understand the concept of theater. But clowns are beings who are psychologically very similar to children, and yet they are adults. Here we have a big kind of incongruous situation, which is one of the sources of humor that the clowns produce. But it's also one of the reasons why children relate to them in such an easy way, because the clowns speak the same language as they do without speaking any language at all.
Yeah, that really makes sense. And I never thought about it like this before. And I suppose also that children and clowns alike are really engaged with the sense of play. And it's not something that they are cautious about exploring. They both willingly play. And thinking about that as an adult, is this sense of play something that we lose as we grow up, or do we just stop allowing ourselves to indulge in it?
I'd love to know myself. I think we have a tendency to channel it elsewhere. We have a tendency to put a label on it. It's like, we accept, as adults, we accept play as, in terms of sports, for example. We say, okay, so sports are an acceptable form of adults playing. But we have to call it something, and we have to give it a special kind of arena. We have to give it these jerseys and a football and whatever. Or it's like betting or things like this. It's like we put these special categories on it, and we dissociate ourselves from it. Unless we enter this special arena, unless we go into the casino, or unless the kids make us go to a merry-go-round, forcibly, in my case anyway, or unless we go play football, or unless we go watch a basketball game. But in our everyday adult lives, none of this should be present. It's like it's all pushed to the sides. It's all it's somewhere else. I think this is something we do to ourselves. I think this is something not very beneficial. When you awaken the spirit of play in yourself, in your everyday life, I think reality becomes, much more cheery. There's much more fun to life when we do not go to specialized places to enjoy being playful, but rather we are playful in our everyday encounters with the world, which starts, with the chair that I sit on and the table that the computer is on, and it ends nowhere. The world is a perfect tool for being playful, but we do not use it for that end because, like I said, we delegate this to children or to these special activities that we consider or call playful. I would myself appreciate if we were all more playful. Then I think the world would be much nicer place to be.
Yeah, I agree. We could all benefit from a little bit more play in our lives, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. From a lot more play, I would say. Yeah.
So when we think about the overall goal of the work of healthcare clowns, we've explored it in real detail today, like very philosophically. But if we think about the goal of what healthcare clowns are doing, is laughter the main goal or a byproduct of something deeper?
If you put a lot of healthcare clowns in a room and you throw this question in and you run away, you will cause a lot of activity around this question. There will be endless discussions because some people would argue that, yes, there's not much more beyond laughter. Laughter in itself is an objective and an aim. If you make someone laugh, from their heart, you have already succeeded. All the rest comes or follows. There are other people who would say, well, clowning is not about laughter, is it? I mean, clowning is about being playful. Clowning can be very poetic. So even if you do not make your audience laugh, maybe you still succeeded as a clown. So there's the whole spectrum of perspectives and of opinions. I personally would say, when I'm performing as a clown and I hear people laugh, I have a good feeling, or I feel that it is a good sign that I have arrived at the destination together with them for which I was aiming, which is basically just, saying in a nice way that I would say, yes, laughter is the goal. Maybe I'm kind of leaning more towards this side of the spectrum. But since we work in healthcare settings, sometimes really laughter, sometimes it's not even appropriate. This is difficult to judge, but sometimes you can feel that the person that your audience does not want to laugh. So you're not going to force them to laugh. And still, by being amazed by the world and by seeing the world as a challenge, like we described before, and by seeing the world as an obstacle, you can still relate to that person very much. There's this very touching story that a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, was telling me from a psychiatry ward. There was a teenage girl, and she was in this situation. She was very melancholy. She had just experienced something very bad in her life, and she was looking at the sun setting behind the window, and the clown came, and she knew that this is not a moment to start looking for to start creating a gag. So she just sat next to the girl. They looked at the sunset together. The girl looked at her. She was crying her eyes out, and the clown started crying also. And they both cried, looking at each other. And then they started laughing so hard because they both cried. It was such an absurd situation. So, laughter might come even though you do not kind of invite it. You definitely do not push for it, and it might still come. But even without the laughter, maybe there was some kind of a very strong and meaningful connection that would be difficult for a non-clown artist to establish in such a situation.
Right. I can imagine it's a very layered question to answer, and the role of a healthcare clown is very nuanced, and laughter is, as you said, not always the primary goal. How does something that looks as light as humor become a genuine tool for mental health support?
You are right in calling humor light in a way. That's coming back to the first question. Humor is not generally considered as something serious or heavy in this way. And yet, I would argue, having studied humor for some time and having performed humor, if you get that sounds very strange. You cannot really perform humor, can you? I take that sentence back because it sounds so very pretentious. But I think that actually humor is just hiding behind this veil of lightness. It's actually something very meaningful. It's something very substantial, but it is wearing this, this kind of this translucent, transparent coat of, do not look at me. I'm almost not here. I'm something that just happens on the side, that comes and goes. But I actually think that when we look for a meaningful relationship with reality and with our own lives, I think it is almost impossible to do without humor. I think humor is a mighty tool in making a meaningful connection with our lives, with other people in our lives, and with our situation in life. It keeps us very healthy. It pretends to be light, and it is light in many ways, but it is also extremely meaningful. But once you put a finger on the meaning, once you say, "Oh, let's all use this mighty tool of humor," as I called it, we're going to break it. It's extremely fragile. It's a bit like bones. They are fragile, but they are also strong. It really depends on. You have to be sensitive in dealing with humor. You have to be careful not to scare it away. It's like a wild animal. It's very strong, but it's also kind of shy.
Yeah.
So many definitions.
No, these are all great analogies, and I totally agree. It's fragile, but we need it every day. And if we didn't have humor, then life would be much darker. We use it to cope, and we use it to have fun, and so many different things. And it's such a versatile tool, which is so vital to the work at Red Noses. Okay, and to wrap up this extensive topic and chat that we've had today, I want to think about the fact that so much of this art form is actually about turning vulnerability into strength. So after all that we've talked about, what do you believe the clown figure ultimately teaches the rest of us about being human?
You used the words vulnerability and strength. I would use the same words, and I would say there's no strength without vulnerability. If we keep pushing for just strength, if we keep pushing for just profits, if we keep pushing for just success, ultimately we will fail. That's what clowns teach us about humanity, I think. It's like when you go too far in one direction, you have to accept that you're also going in the other, and you have to accept the shadow of this situation, to use a psychological term. We cannot really disconnect vulnerability from strength. Unless you are aware of your vulnerability, you will never be as strong as you can.
And vulnerability is also how people connect to each other, right? You can't connect to people fully unless they're vulnerable with you. So I guess that's what helps people in these difficult settings, like crisis environments, hospital environments, connect with the clown, because there's this element of vulnerability that is shared there.
Absolutely, because you have an audience which is not only vulnerable, because we all are somehow vulnerable, but you have an audience which is actually experiencing presently their vulnerability. They have actually been hurt in a way. There's something is happening with their body or with their minds. They are actually suffering in a way. So they are exploring their vulnerability in the here and now. So you're absolutely right. When the clown comes and the clown shows the vulnerability of the human condition and the vulnerability of their own character, which is essentially the vulnerability of their own life, of their own reality, then the connection is, of course, easier.
So thank you so much, Lukáš, for this amazing insight. It's been really great to draw from your extensive experience and have a really in-depth discussion about the art of healthcare clowning. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Molly. I wish we had 2 more days.
Yeah, it's a long, long topic. This has been Between Two Curtains by Red Noses International. I've been your host, Molly Perkins. Music and editing is by Kata Bitoft, and you can find this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.